Apparently they thought the force field was going to collapse or something. You know? And this practice, which is not easy, is really about being yourself. And sometimes you do things well, like this, and sometimes you don't do things well, like this, you know? But what's your intention behind it? What's your effort behind it? That's where it's at. The intention behind coughing is simply, it's a natural thing. I don't know if it's natural, but it's the thing we do. You know, it's probably caused by something, naturally, I guess, but we cough.
But is there good intention of them?
Hang on, wait, not yet. Think first. Why are we so afraid to cough? Before we go to justifying it, before we go to rationalizing it, before we go into answer it, the question is, why are you afraid to cough? And then the question is, why are you afraid to do? It's always the dudes who just want to answer it, you know? And then why is it that you're afraid to do half the things you do in your life? Why is there so much fear? These are not simple answers. These are not things to solve like in an immediate, moment. But where's the fear coming from? And this is something that we need to explore. And when you tie that into this realization that when you begin to explore the nature of your own mind and this practice, it doesn't mean it's going to be simple. Anyone in here have a mind that's a mess? So why do you think that just because you meditate and do Buddhist stuff for a few years, that all of a sudden that's going to go away? It's not. You're looking at the mess. But you're learning to embrace it. You're learning to be okay with it. You're learning to be with it as it is. Just like needing to cough. Just be with it. Don't even try to answer, oh, I was worried about everybody else. And the reason to me that doesn't work is when we're mean to people out there, we're not worried about everyone else, right? But when we're doing something that we want to try to solve, we often make ourselves sound like we're so kind to others. It's like offering to do things for people, but you're really wanting something pretty heavy in return from it. As always, I'm sure nobody in this room ever falls into that category. But that happens a lot. Why the fear in coughing? And there are some pretty heavy explorations to do around that. And, at least in that moment, during that conversation, the individual was able to come back in and just be and cough. But again, to me, that's really just a metaphor for everything in life that we're running away from. So embrace the madness, embrace the craziness, embrace the beauty of who you are. We're just people who cough. So, thoughts, answers from Bill and Evan. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that if their true intention was to remove the cough from other people getting distracted by it, is that not right intention?
It is potentially intention proper, but there's no wisdom to it. And you know this, but for those who might be new to this practice, there is no disruptions. Coughing is not a disruption. It is a thing that is happening. Right? Maybe our silence was ruining this person's coughing. In silence, it's still a sound. So there are no distractions. There's just life that's happening always. And then we figure out how are we going to respond to it. And what I eventually, one of the things I said to them, which I say this always when this comes up, is that if your coughing bothers them, that's their mess to deal with. You know? There was somebody who used to come to meditation, the old Buddha for You, and they would come kind of a long way. And, you know, you get a lot of the same people for years, but they don't always come like every night. And so you have kind of a transient group that pops in once every, 2 or 3 weeks or something. Thank God you don't all show up at once, or we wouldn't have anywhere to put you. But and this person was so bothered by the way this other person would breathe. But it was fascinating because I swear to God, every time person A was there who got bothered, person B was there who they didn't like the way they would breathe. And old Buddha for You, for those who remember it, I mean, it was like the size of this shrine area. That was it. It was small, and we packed like 50 people in there. So if you were in the first row or you were in the last row, you were about like 6 feet apart from them or something like that. It was really close. And they just couldn't stand the way they would breathe. And they would breathe. It was loud, but that's how they breathe. And they came up to me and they were like, and it's a friend of mine, I've known this person like 10 years, and they said, Jeff, can you please just ask them ask them to stop breathing? What do you want? Right? And they wanted me to ask them to change the way they were breathing.
Jeff, it sounds like a marriage.
Like a marriage, right? Yeah. Yeah, right? Good luck with that. So, Evan, yeah. You had the answer.
Oh, no, I was just saying, yeah, it's the whole hitting the way they butter their bread thing, right?
Yeah. It's tough. Yeah. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah.
Was that a koan when you said, why are you afraid to breathe? Or to cough, why are you
Sure. It wasn't intended to be a koan, but if you received it as a koan, it could be yours. Yeah, I don't own it.
Well, I got the husband who breathes loud. So
You got the husband who breathes loud. I don't even know what I said, but sure, if that works for you, absolutely. Yes, it was a koan. Yes. I look forward to the answer. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, my thought on meditation for me was that my awareness is like a room and the thought is like a dog I play with. And as the dog comes in, either I play with it or it plays with me, and then it leaves the room once in a while, and I'm sitting with the room itself. The dog comes back in and I'm allowed to play with that. So it's a much more gentler, kinder way of relating my thoughts and engaging with them,
Yeah.
as opposed to being like, this is wrong, as the way I used to think of thinking in and of itself. And so now it's become more gentler and more practice.
Right. And you're the dude who's new to meditation, right?
I've been doing this since I was a kid, though.
Okay.
So, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
But new here, yes.
But yeah, that's, yes, that's the general idea, is that we're not going to stop thoughts, most likely, from arising. But we don't have to create the story behind them. Like you said, the dog coming into the room and playing with the dog. We don't have to create the story that we sit with for 20 minutes or 20 years. Because those thoughts are never going to stop arising. Right? My example for that I always share is when we sit in meditation, again, for those who might be new and you might be thinking like, I'm not getting this, it's not working, I'm failing because my thoughts keep racing, right? I've been doing this 20-something years and my mind still races like a mad person, right? Every day for the last 16 years and my mind still races, right? But what I'm working on is thought arises, say it's hunger. Recognize that thought, release it, back to breath. Breath in, breath out, next thought, there it is, hunger again. Recognize, release it, kind of like you're talking about with the dog, back to the breath. So that's what I'm working on. What I don't want to do, thought arises, hunger. I'm hungry. What do I want to eat? I want a burrito. I'm going to go to Pokies. I want cheese, I want chips, I want sauce. I'd like another drink. right? So from one single thought of hunger, I sat there for 5 minutes thinking about the burrito I want to eat. And the reason to me this is important is that it's really a reflection of our lives, where we have one single thought, and that thought can trigger us down a 7-year miserable state. Or that thought can arise and we can see it as a thought, and we can appreciate it, and we can be aware of the emotions that come from it, and we can allow it to pass. That's the practice. And sometimes we do really great jobs with that, and sometimes we stay with that thought for 7 years. Yeah. Other questions? Was there hands? Yeah.
How do you find balance in life?
How do I find balance in life? Like me personally, I don't really have a scale. I mean, to me, when you say, how do I find balance in life? When I hear balance, I think of like weight. And I have this image in my mind of like things going like this, right? And if things are going like this, like what are those called? Seesaw things, right? Or, well, that doesn't work with my scale thing, but I'm thinking about a scale and you weigh things. I don't weigh anything. Personally.
No expectation.
No, I mean, nobody's ever asked me that question specifically. I mean, I can talk on and on and on about, finding a middle path, and I can say some things on that in a minute, but me personally, that's my initial reaction is, how do I find balance? I don't weigh anything. I just do things. I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. I, focus on what I do. But, I think that for people that really struggle with balance, it's important to, as I mentioned, the middle path. And that's really the essence of the Buddhist teachings, especially for lay people, is that we're not living these renunciate lives of nuns or monks, and we're not living in a forest with a robe and and a bowl and shaved heads, right? We're engaged in the world. And so how do we find that middle path, that balance, while we are living our lives as, householders and families and husbands and wives and sons and daughters and partners and all of that kind of stuff? Where do we find a balance? And I think most important with finding balance is to understand, where are you lacking balance? Where do you feel that the scale is kind of, we know when we feel like I'm missing this from my life, or I need more of this in my life, or pay attention to those things. But, what's that? Awareness of them is, I think, where you start. And then it requires discipline and motivation, diligence, these key kind of Buddhist terms, diligence, right? If we lack balance in our lives and we're not doing the things we love or want to do, there's a good chance we've been doing it that way for a long time, right? So to unplug from that is not easy. And that's where the diligence comes into play, where it requires also, I think there's a lot of bravery required to live your life in a very different way from what you're used to. For everybody here, whatever that means to you, to live a life a little bit differently from what you're comfortable with, you got to be brave. Because it's very easy to kind of settle into our just routines, and this is my life, and I wake up, and I clock in here, and I clock in there, and I go here, and I go there, and I do this, and I do that, and then I go to sleep. And then we just hit repeat day in and day out, and then we die. All right? Awareness and fearlessness, which is kind of required to be brave. There's a lot of great quotes out there about, people fearing death and things like that, but a lot of great quotes around what often people fear the most isn't so much dying, it's actually living. It's like we're afraid to live. So we're afraid to cough. Right? Yeah. Do you have a question? Yeah. Does that help at all? Yeah. Question? Yeah.
I was just curious, what you think about empathy and like compassion. Like if you are someone who's very empathic and kind of takes on the emotions of other people and
Right.
weighs you down, how do you balance that with like being compassionate and like setting boundaries, I guess?
Yeah. No, it's a great question about, how if someone who is an empath and really takes on the emotions and feelings of others and trying to be compassionate, but that can ruin you, right? The metaphor of the airplane, the oxygen mask falls, and what do they tell you to do? You got to put it on yourself first before you put it on a child, right? Because if you don't stay alive, you can't help anybody. I think you know that. That's probably why you're asking the question. But again, I always come back to the awareness. Like, first is to be aware of what the situation is. And then from there, it's to recognize that the practice is to be fully present, to bear witness, to have compassion for people as you encounter them. But as soon as you turn and walk away, and even when you're in front of them or with them or hugging them or whatever it might be, they are on their own. The mistake I feel we often make in trying to have compassion and empathy for others is we can very quickly turn that into trying to control and manipulate. You have no idea how many people I've seen in places like this for years who are here because they're struggling because someone they know and love is struggling even worse, right? And so we have to recognize that each person, again, if you got a 3-year-old, you don't let a 3-year-old roam on their own, right? But each person has their own path and their own journey. And can we truly, and this gets into the teachings on non-attachment, which really is love. Non-attachment is endless love, endless compassion, and understanding that each person has their own karma, their own journey, their own path. And can we be present and meet them where they are, but not carry it with us? I was 20 in college working in group homes where we were counseling adolescent females who've been physically, sexually, emotionally abused. So 23 years ago, I started working with people who were going through severe trauma. And I had a mentor at that time, and I remember she was wonderful. And she said, Jeff, and I'm a 20-year-old kid at that, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? And I show up, and she said, Jeff, no offense to any 20-year-old kids in here. And I said, Jeff, she said, Jeff, when you show up here, be 100% present with them. But as soon as you walk out this door, you cannot take them with you. Because if you do, it will destroy you. And these were, in essence, strangers, meaning I didn't know them. But I've carried that teaching with me for a long time, whether it's with strangers, in a prison environment or whatever it might be, or with loved ones, family, friends, people you see that are maybe unhealthy and you wish they were doing things differently. You can't carry that with you. And I know it doesn't do much good to say you can't carry it with you, because as soon as you walk out this door, you're still going to be carrying it with you, most likely. But don't forget to carry you with you first. Does that make sense? Put as much carrying withness into you as you do into others. That's tough. Yeah. Other questions?
Could you take that a step further, I suppose, and say that maybe you don't have to carry parts of yourself with you once you leave somewhere, if you don't want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at the Buddha's teachings on being present, we understand that we have a whole, just if we look at one life, right, just this life, we have a whole bunch of causes and conditions that have happened that put us in this very moment. And as we go forward, some of them we'll want to carry with us because they're beneficial and we learn from them and they're joyful and they're pleasant. And some of the experiences we've had, we don't want to carry them with us. We want to just set them down. And it's not always easy. But years ago, friends of ours, Atul and Kalpna, when we had, this is Dharma Bums in 2007, and a year into it, basically, a year and a half into it, and we had a bit of a shattering early on. And they said the most beautiful thing about when something breaks is you pick up the pieces you want and you move forward. That's actually where the 3 little Ganesh statues behind me came from, old Dharma Bum days. We went over there, and again, it's a long story for another day, but things drastically about a year and a half in kind of fell apart. And that was what they said to us. And they said, you pick up what you want and you move on. So 3 of us grabbed 3 Ganesh statues and we moved on, and your choice is what? To move on or to continue? And you can look back. I mean, I don't want to tell you what you can do, but of course we look back on things. But getting over things we've done in the past or things that have happened to us in the past are extremely difficult. And that's where that training of the mind to be present is. Here I am. I'm sitting and breathing. I've had pleasant, I've had unpleasant, and here I am sitting and breathing. Going forward, I'm going to have pleasant, I'm going to have unpleasant, and neutral. And I'm just going to keep breathing. But life, when the Buddha said life is filled with suffering, he wasn't kidding. That's the first thing he said, but somehow we come into this Buddhist practice and we're like, all right, I'm going to, this whole Buddhist thing is going to make me all calm and quiet and peaceful. No, it's probably going to make you a big mess for a while. Because you're going to be really honest with what's going on in your head and in your heart. Right? And sometimes that honesty of what's going on in your head and in your heart is not always so pretty to look at. To call yourself out on your actions and is not always the best. It's not always fun. It's painful. But since we have the force field with us to do it, we can get through it. So, anything else before we close? Do one more if anybody has anything they want to share or add.
You said to me a couple times that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And when you were just brought up the picking up the pieces of that time, it just hit me that if that hadn't happened, this right now would.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. And if what happened in the early Dharma Bum days, and really it was 2000.